Hello, hello.
Hi,
Welcome to another episode of Our Years.
this is Barry.
And I'm Rima.
And in today's episode, we'll be continuing our chat about culture shock. So if you have not seen that episode, we've chatted about the experience of our lives, personal lives, and the culture shocks we've had upon moving to the States. But in today's episode, we'll be continuing that, but in the workplace. Considering we've both actually, for Rima, worked in India and for me in Taiwan. Obviously, Rima longer, so maybe she's got...
Obviously.
Because she's way into her
Way
days.
into, yeah.
I think because we've experienced working in countries that we are from and then now moving to the States, we've experienced some culture shock. So wanted to chat about that.
Yeah.
To kick us off, maybe you can tell us what your biggest moment in the workplace was where you experienced culture shock.
I think the biggest one that stands out is the difference in flexibility during work hours. For instance, in America, I'm allowed, or it's not frowned upon if I take time off.
Allowed. I love how you use that word.
I know, I quickly yeah, it's not frowned upon for me to take some time off during the day if I have to run personal errands.
Right.
And that's the norm.
Yep.
That's not the exception. But in India, I couldn't be allowed to just leave the workplace to run my own errands.
It's funny that you say allowed because I think it's interesting in that in East culture, like it's almost like you have to report to your manager in order to get permission to do something while you're at work.
Yeah. And a lot of most of the companies that I worked in India were like flat hierarchy organizations. So there was less of that relationship that you're talking about. But even then, it was a conversation to be had that if you are taking time off to go run an errand,
You
for instance,
should.
it was still a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But over here, that's not the norm.
That's interesting because I felt the same way when I first moved to the States. I remember when I first joined my company, in the first 2 weeks or so, you kind of had to deal with a lot of admin stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember one of the days I had to go to the DMV or something in the morning. And so I texted my manager saying, hey, this morning I'll be doing this and this and this. And it was not work related.
Yeah.
And I did it because I felt like I needed to report to him to kind of let him know that I'm not slacking and that I needed to get this done and that I would come back later to do my work. And he was like, Barry, did you send this text to the wrong person? And I was so confused. I was like, no, it's meant for you. And he's like, why are you telling me this? And I was like, well, I need to let you know what I'm doing because this is during work hours. And he was like, Barry, I trust that you're able to go and complete that task that you're responsible for. I don't expect that you do it in a specific time frame. So do what you need to do. Go get whatever work you need to get done. Totally fine. You don't need to report to me. And so to me, that was a huge culture shock because even though I was in an American company when I was in Taiwan and my manager's pretty open-minded and, pretty flexible, I thought that was a huge culture shock to me here. They gave you so much trust. Going back to the point that we made in our previous episode about having trust in because you're an adult, right? And I think that's very consistent through the workplace as well.
Yeah. I've noticed that too, that this sense of inherent trust is there not just in in school. I noticed that in school, but also in the workplace it's transferred.
Right.
And so that's been very interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think that was a huge transition for me because I felt guilty going out during the work hours to go run my own personal errands or going to the gym. And it's funny because when I was chatting to my manager, he was like, Barry, if you're feeling tired throughout the day and you just want to pick me up, then go to gym in the hour that you don't have a meeting, go do that, don't feel like you need to be restricted to here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed that in India, typically staying back late, for instance, is almost celebrated.
Yes.
Right? But here, if you're staying back late, then you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Right? And it's looked down upon and it's not encouraged.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's quite I want to say a pretty toxic environment in that the expectation is that if you put in more hours, it means you're a harder worker.
Yeah, that's not the case. You could just be faffing,
right?
But you're just around for
Right.
longer hours.
Yeah. No, I agree. And when I was in Taiwan, I felt like I couldn't leave the office before my manager did. Because it almost looked like I wasn't working so hard.
Right.
Yeah, unless obviously I had like a reason to.
No. I've experienced that too, where even though I was done with my work for the day, I didn't want to leave before my manager left back in India.
Right.
Because it looks a certain way. But here, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, it's true. So yeah, that was one of the biggest culture shocks I think I experienced. But another one I think is like expectations in the workplace, right? I think in Taiwan, because of the culture, I think there's like a seniority sort of like placement or authority where you kind of need to respect. And I say respect in the sense that they think that that is respect, right? Rather
the outward show of it.
Yes. Rather than expecting you as a human, as like a coworker, you need to be respected in terms of the years of experience that you have in the company or in life even. Yeah. And I thought that was quite interesting because when I came here, there was none of that. Like I felt like when I was talking to a coworker who's been working 10 years or 20 years at the company, I felt like they were very respectful of the knowledge that I bring and the value that I bring to the team, even though I'm new to the company, even though I have less experience than he does. And I really enjoyed that because how flat the hierarchy was.
Yeah.
Or is, sorry.
Yeah. The companies that I work for in India, they would say the hierarchy is flat, but there was this, and in the sense that, like you said, there's the outward show of what that means, right? Like you don't call your managers or your seniors like sir or madam. That's what
you guys did that.
Yeah, typically in legacy companies in India, that's still the norm.
Wow.
Like in banks and so on. But because I joined the workforce relatively earlier. Relatively later. I didn't have that. So there was that sense of flat hierarchy where the outward show was not there. So I had that, which I think is similar here. Since moving here, I haven't heard of people say that using these honorifics is a thing at work.
That's true. Yeah, speaking of honorifics, I think that's also the case in Taiwan where you have like seniors, even if they're from your same university.
Yes.
And then you end up in the same company, you would still respect them in the way that they're seniors and they have more knowledge than you do because they are. Yeah.
Even though they failed that subject. Another thing I noticed after working here about expectation setting is that it's easier to set boundaries here at work. For instance, if you have plans in the evening and you cannot work, you can just let your colleagues know that you will not be available and that's fine. But in India, that's not encouraged.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Like a work day is a work day and you're expected to be on call all the time.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think maybe the same in Taiwan, but because I work for an American company, I didn't feel that as much. But I can see that being something that is the norm in Taiwan as well.
Yeah, like even if you're on vacation, if there is a meeting
and it's urgent,
you're expected. Like back in India, the expectation was that you should be on call
because you're responsible for that project or task.
And saying no was difficult.
I agree.
Pushing back was difficult. And also, okay, to be fair, when I was working in India, I was also younger and like I was just getting into the workplace. So maybe a lot of it was what I was doing too. But I thought saying no to work was very difficult. But as opposed to here, when I say no, I think there's that thing about inherent trust where people don't think I'm just shirking my work.
Right.
And it's just that I need to compartmentalize certain aspects.
Yeah.
So I find that easier here.
And I think it's interesting. The respect that you get here is from the reputation that you build for yourself through like how much
you contribute.
Right. And how much effort and work you put into the task that you have. And I think your reputation and the respect that you get is from trust that you build through your actions, right? Whereas in Taiwan or East Asia in general, I feel like the reputation that you have is built on the
title.
Yeah, your title or the number of years of experience that you have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like just because you're a VC, you can command a certain respect,
Right.
but here like you've earned the
Right, correct.
earned the respect
Yes.
of people.
Yeah, earned is the right word. Yeah, exactly. So I think like that was quite interesting to see that difference. So I think going off of that is like one of the things I noticed is getting sign off or approval from people who are more senior in the company to kind of like oversee that you're doing the right work or good work instead of letting you learn by like if the things don't go as well, it's fine here, and you kind of just learn from your mistakes and you do better next time. But there it's almost like they need to sign off, or people in more senior positions need to sign off and give you approval on the tasks and decisions that you make.
Interesting.
Yeah. For example, here, if the DRI, so the actual person responsible for the task or the project, even though they're in like just maybe a junior engineer, they are able to make a decision for that project, provided that they, walk it through with their manager, but they don't necessarily need to get approval or sign off from their manager, right?
Okay.
I think it's more so like they trust that you have the expertise and knowledge. And even if it doesn't go as well, right? Like it's kind of like an opportunity for you to learn and grow.
And that's encouraged.
Yes, and that's encouraged here. Whereas I think in East Asia, it's like they kind of want to avoid you making mistakes, and so you kind of always need to get sign off on key decisions or approval on key decisions, especially when you're a junior engineer or DRI.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's going back, I think inherently the trust in the different cultures, right?
Yeah.
I think here it's like they very much encourage you making decisions for the team and trusting that you have knowledge and expertise. And even if you don't,
that's actually one of the feedback I received at work is that I should be more vocal with my opinions and not wait explicitly for sign
people
off.
Interesting. I think I got the same feedback, and I think it stems from the culture differences.
Yeah, because it's not like I don't have confidence in what I'm proposing, but I feel like that's not my place to do.
That is true.
And so that's actually feedback that I've received.
I agree. And to go off of that, I think another feedback I got is that people felt like I was not confident in decisions because I kind of waited around for people to give me their approval or sign off before I kind of tied things together with my opinions. That's interesting.
And I didn't realize that, and I was surprised by it. Because I thought what I was doing was correct.
Right. I think another one for me in the workplace is the relationships that you have with your coworkers and your manager. I think that was slightly different to the dynamics that you have in Taiwan. I think going back to the point about like seniority and people with more experience, I think here it's because it's a flat hierarchy. I felt like I can be friends with my manager and like give him my feedback on how I'm working on the team. Whereas I think in East Asia, it was almost like I felt like I needed to filter certain things because of coming across a certain way, like maybe coming across as not as experienced or not confident, or just feeling like there wasn't a safe space for me to be transparent about my relationship with my coworkers.
You still had to be like alert.
Yes, because you also don't want to come across as you're throwing your coworker under the bus. Whereas here, I feel like at least with managers that I work with, I'm able to be vocal and give feedback about the good and the bad with coworkers.
That's interesting you say that, because I didn't find the difference in that aspect when I moved here, because I was very friendly with my managers even back in India.
Right.
And so that wasn't a big difference in terms of that hierarchy. So I think to my previous point about how the outward show of what a flat hierarchy meant, maybe those didn't exist. But setting boundaries was difficult, but I think we were still very friendly with each other, and a lot of them knew what was happening in my personal life, for instance, so we'd all go out and grab drinks after work and stuff. So that was very similar. I think what's different for me in terms of relationships here is I'm not friends with my coworkers. Like, I'm friendly with them, but I'm not friends with them. We don't make plans outside of work. And I think that's typically the case. I don't see a lot of my other friends also being friends with their coworkers. But back in India, the adult friendships that I had stemmed
Were
from the
mostly
workplace.
from work. Yeah. I think the point about relationships with your manager is that now that I am here, it's interesting how much effort the managers actually put into cultivating good relationships within the team. So I think one thing that was a culture shock to me is that my manager set up one-on-ones every week with me, whereas back in Taiwan it was almost like maybe a couple of months you would
check in.
Yeah, you would check in, and it would mostly be on like, you know, how your project is doing, you know, how your coworkers, or how like the working relationships between you and coworkers. Whereas here it's more like your manager wants to see you like succeed and put in ways that he can or she can help you to achieving your goals in your career.
Yeah.
And so you set up these weekly one-on-ones to talk through those things in addition to all the other things that I mentioned. But it's more like a consistent close check-in to make sure that you're in a good place at work.
When you were working in Taiwan, were you on same projects as your manager?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that's the difference? Because currently now you're not on similar projects with your manager. So do you think that's why? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're on, like, obviously my manager covers a lot more areas and projects, but he oversees the overall project that I'm on.
Okay.
Yeah. But I believe yours doesn't, right?
Yeah, no. My manager doesn't know what I'm doing.
I think that's quite interesting that your manager doesn't.
Yeah, it's really interesting that like every day we don't work together,
right?
Because we're on different projects, but she always knows what I'm doing.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know what her system is, but it's very efficient.
Your like structure for the org is quite different in that your manager doesn't oversee the project that you're working on.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the one-on-one thing for me when you were mentioning it, and it's true, even in India, like I didn't have one-on-ones with my managers, but we were all on similar or same projects, so they sort of knew what was happening, and if there were areas of improvement or things to be celebrated.
Yep.
Those came up like organically, so there was not like check-ins. So I always thought that was why. I didn't realize, but now that you say it, maybe there is a cultural thing.
Yeah. It's funny because when I first started having these weekly one-on-ones with my manager, I was actually scared of not having not having anything to talk about because I wasn't used to that, right? But now that we have them, I see the value of it, and getting feedback and advice and suggestions from your manager.
Yeah. Even I had that issue. So I know what you're thinking. Even I had the thing about it being just awkward silence. Yeah. And I wouldn't know what to say.
I would feel so nervous going into it because I didn't have anything to come like talk about.
But now we go over time because of how much.
Correct. Yeah. And even if it's just like chatting about your personal lives, because I think it's nice because your manager actually cares for you as a person and wants to know what's going on in your personal life so that he can see if it's like impacting your work and how he can help you out or get you help at work. Yeah,
my manager was telling me which vineyards to visit.
Yes, coming up with like an Excel list and discussing which places are the to-go places. I'm interested to actually know what it was like for you working during COVID when you were in India.
So the company that I was working for during COVID was actually remote friendly even pre-COVID. So I wasn't going into work every day. And that was actually encouraged. So, because I was in consulting and I was working with people in very different time zones. So I think there was also that aspect of it. And so going remote during COVID was not such a huge change for me.
Interesting. In Taiwan, because during COVID, we were actually I think it was very well organized. The healthcare like got us in early where everybody wore masks. And so COVID didn't hit as hard in Taiwan.
Okay.
And so there wasn't this concept of remote working.
That's wild.
In Taiwan. So during COVID, I actually still went into work. There were just safety precautions where everybody wore masks and was testing for COVID like every couple of days.
That is so different from what was happening
I feel like
India.
Everybody lived it like such a different life. And going to that point, I think is how like remote work is such a foreign concept in Taiwan. I think also maybe because of the industry, right? Because a lot of Taiwan companies are manufacturing.
So you have to go into the lab and clean rooms and stuff.
Exactly. And so even if during COVID, I don't think like they would actually stop work, right? Like you would just be extra cautious about what safety precautions you take at work.
In terms of like cultural differences, in terms of remote work, was that very different for you here when you could work from home?
Yeah, I think like I wouldn't say it's like fully a culture shock, but coming here and realizing how like accepted and widespread the remote culture is, I think was a big difference and adjustment for me in Taiwan. I think even though the work I didn't require me to go into like a clean room or fab, I don't think it was encouraged that people work from home unless it was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that stems from like a culture again of like the trust that your managers or the company has in you that you'll do your work.
Yeah, or more supervision is required versus not.
Right. And I think maybe that accounts for the difference, and how I don't think in Taiwan there is a path to fully remote work in the workplace.
In terms of career progression or how promotions are viewed, do you think there's a difference in culture?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe, and I don't want to say this just because I've only worked in Taiwan for like just under a year. Maybe I wasn't experienced enough, but it seems to me that in Taiwan, you wouldn't proactively talk about promotions or, growth in the company. I think it's almost like when you work hard, you naturally get promoted. I think it's more so like when in Taiwan, I guess, and maybe feel free to correct me, folks in Taiwan, but my understanding is that like your hard work pays off in the sense that your manager will see the hard work that you put in, and so they'll promote you accordingly. Whereas here, I think you kind of chat to your manager about your career progression and what you can be doing or how long it will take before you get promoted, and kind of get your manager's help on how to achieve that. I think in Taiwan, I did actually chat to my manager about like career progression, but it wasn't like there was like a rubrics, I think there was a rubrics, but it was almost like once you become more experienced or once we see that you're like hardworking, you'll get promoted. Instead of being like, for me now chatting to my manager, I need to proactively be like, I'm looking to get promoted within the next like year or two.
You have to be more of an advocate for yourself.
Right. Yes, exactly that. I think you put it very well. I think in East Asian culture, it's more so like passive, and you don't really advocate for yourself. You kind of just show the work and let the work speak for itself, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's quite a difference. Whereas here, you kind of plan it out with your manager. And it like you kind of talk through where your weaker areas are so that you can work on those in order to get promoted in a year or two, the time frame you've set for yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely more proactive here. I felt that too.
Yeah. And I think that was new to me. Like I remember moving here and I was chatting to my coworkers and they're like, oh, you need to chat to your manager about getting promoted. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, you need to actively advocate for yourself and tell your manager that this is what you want in order to set yourself up for success to achieve that. Okay, how about you? Like, what else in the workplace was a culture shock?
I think general communication was a big shock, and I think we spoke about small talk in our previous episode as well. But I think when I moved here, when I saw the difference in just how meetings were run, right? When I start a meeting, I just start, this is the agenda, this is what we're covering. But then when my American colleagues start meetings, it's more, how's everyone's day going? What would you do over the weekend? And there's still that sort of small talk that happens.
Right.
And when I moved here, I realized how bad at small talk I am.
Right.
Because it's just not in our conditioning.
Used to it, right.
Yeah, we're not used to it. And so that was a shock that I have to be more mindful about how I just simple things like start a meeting. But that was like making a huge difference in how I communicate to people.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it also like affects the ambiance that you set up for the meeting, right? It's like you want people to be in like a good space and mind before you get into the nitty-gritty things of work.
That was actually feedback I got.
Oh,
that
really?
People thought I was it was like informal feedback, but they thought I was very serious just because I wasn't joking around about some of these things. And so when they met me like outside of work, they were surprised that I was that person, but I was not used to making small talk.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that making small talk is actually a skill.
It truly is. And I think it really defines how like you are able to progress in in your work, because it affects the relationships that you have with your coworkers, right?
Yeah, you don't want them to think every meeting is just going to be like cut and dry.
Right.
Yeah. So a culture shock here is that I realized that I have to bring in more of my personality to
That's
work.
true.
As opposed to back in India, there were sort of boundaries on what you could bring into work.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's funny because I feel like the personality hire is a new concept here in the States. And it's why we have a friend and we think that he's like the personality hire for his team. Because he literally does, like, in my opinion, he's always just like faffing, and he'll be pinging us in the middle of the day to make plans for the weekend.
Yeah.
But he's got really good personality, and I can see how that adds value to his team.
Yeah.
But yeah, that concept is out of scope here.
No one's going to be spending money on personality in the East.
Yeah. But I think like the cultural difference there is that I think in East Asian culture, it's like you're hired for your abilities to complete tasks and work in the workplace.
Not how you enhance ambience at work.
Correct. And I think here is like a combination of the two, right? Like you're hired for your abilities, but as well as the personality that you bring to the team,
and how you can keep morale up at work.
Yes,
like those are not considerations that I was used to. So yeah, that was a huge culture shock.
Yeah, for sure. I think team dynamic, and like you said, like team morale is a huge one here in the States, and people really care about that. And I think for good reason, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to be able to go into a workplace that you enjoy, and have a good time at, so that you can do good work.
Yeah.
To your point, I think like small talk is a skill, and we really need to.
It's an underrated skill.
It is an underrated skill, but I feel like I've become good at that now that we've been in the States a couple of years.
Can someone else attest this?
Only me. No, but I think there are certain ways that you can be better, and I've started reading like these self-improvement books on how to master small talk.
Do you have any tips and tricks for us?
No, that can be a separate episode. But yeah, I think that wraps it up for the culture shocks that at least we've experienced and remember. So if you have anything, again, it would be interesting for us to know what experiences other people have had in terms of culture shock in the workplace.
Yeah, we'd love to know that. So please drop your comments.
Yeah. And we'll see you in the next one. Maybe we'll come back and like review what other people have experienced. That would be fun to kind of see what other people have gone through. See you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.